Hello and welcome to my new channel. This could very well be the first video or it may be the second or third, but it's definitely going to be up there very soon. I'm James and this is
Liz.
and today we've got
Summer.
Summer. All right, so basically we want to use this channel to bring up all kinds of fun topics, a lot of self-help stuff, and anything that kind of really gets us empowered and living our best and fullest life, as well as many other topics and things that we might be going through as we're going through different changes. So today we kind of had a special topic because there's been some big movement in a really popular documentary that was recently released. And this documentary is called Out of Shadows. It is free on YouTube. So feel free to follow the link down below, and you're going to be able to watch this whole video for free. Fantastic film. It has like 11 million views, currently. I think in the first 48 hours, it had like 6 million views. So really informative video. So definitely take your time if you haven't seen it to watch it. Now, for those of you who may have seen this video, something that I feel was really important to kind of discuss is possibly some of the things and thought processes that we're going through as we think about this information. And there is a lot of some topics in there are a little dark topics, but this is really important information. It's a lot of stuff that some of us in the truther community would say that we're fairly aware of. So it's interesting to see this really build and go, fairly mainstream. Now, Sommer, who's got an interesting point of view from this, I think it's important that we shared this because we were talking about this the other day, and I said, man, we really need to get this out because I bet there's other people feeling the same way. And we're not necessarily going to go into details on the movie. We may bring up a few things that we found interesting in there, but mostly what I want to get into is how are we processing this information? How are we really digesting what that information is about? And I guess to kind of start off a little bit with this, for me, Out of Shadows, I've been looking into some of this information for quite a while, and I found this to be one of the best ways to really introduce this. A lot of us call it the red pill, red pilling, people, so that you're getting into some topics, information you may not have been so aware of. And this covers many different things. One of those might be stuff around the Satanistic rituals and things that are going on that are in Hollywood. They're in the political systems. It's been going on a very long time. Those that grew up around the 80s, there was actually kind of an era where it was brought up more and made to seem a little bit more of a real problem, and then it just disappeared. And the truth is that it hasn't just vanished. It's continued and it's grown, and if it wasn't already really big before. So when we were talking about this the other day, Summer, the really interesting thing to me is a lot of this has been normalized, right? So, and what I mean by that is that even in our art, in our music, in our movies, we got horror movies and all this. And I'm somebody who grew up watching horror movies. I'm somebody that's grown up listening to like metal music and rock music, and I enjoyed those times in my life. Depending on perspective. But it did help me. It helped me get through a lot of that, and I think that's where a lot of that expression comes from. So I don't want to say in any way or judge in any way those that are using that as an outlet for them. But the question becomes, if we weren't exposed to those things to begin with, right, would we feel so, expressive in those areas? Would we want to be so aggressive in our music? And is it okay that we have movies that seem to just, they've turned entertainment into blood and gore and death, and there is a lot of satanic and many other really dark topics in these things. We're just watching a movie last night, and it had this really kind of dark underlying theme in it. And I'm not going to jump into that because I'm not using this video for that, but it was in there, and we were like the whole time, now that we're awake to those topics, we're like, wow, this is just in here. And before would I have recognized it, right? And then is it okay? Because, well, it's entertainment. It's a movie, right? So Summer, give us a little bit of your opinion. I guess, start off with a little bit of that first impression, because I know that you're sort of already stepped into some of those areas, but only recently have you been kind of deep diving probably a little bit more, and you're getting that feeling of that first impression as well as I think a lot of people are, and then a bit about how you might process that information.
Okay, so first of all, I'm probably a little bit of the oddball here because there's a lot of controversial stuff that's in Out of Shadows that I haven't completely discerned, and I'm not sure that I have established opinions one way or the other. However, there are things in that documentary that are for sure happening. Basically what you're talking about is the stuff that is in the art that's mentioned, and which is what we were talking about, is that issue. And so for myself, I was a music journalist for many years and promoter, primarily with rock and metal. I grew up being what you would call goth, I guess. That wasn't a term then, but that would be the term for it now, apparently. And grew up on horror movies as well. And so that was, huge part of my upbringing, just as it was yours. There's a lot of that influence, and I have an appreciation for that. However, as I've became more lighter myself, my opinions are definitely switching. So shifting. I'm finding that stuff, it feels different.
Right.
There's more of a disturbing, ill feeling that I'm getting, around a lot of that stuff. And it started happening with the music first because, I kind of left that journalism promotion world because I felt really exhausted by being around that for so long. So, that was a part of why I left that, and I kind of transitioned into some other things still in that world to leave that behind. At the time, I didn't realize what all of that was about. I thought I was just kind of tired from, everything. But I think that was part of it, was that I was around so much darkness and unhappy. There's really a lot of unhappiness in that industry too.
Yeah, and just while we're on that too, because we didn't really give you a full introduction there too. So just tell us just a little bit about like what it was you were doing previously, like this environment that you were working in. Tell us a little more on that background, just so because we have a better idea of where you're coming from on that too.
Yeah,
because it's important. You had really great work you were working on.
Well, I mean, I had the promotion company, and I was, doing shows all over the Midwest and working with mid-level as well as local, and then some national acts, primarily, like I said, rock and metal. And then I was also a journalist working for a magazine in LA called Screamer Magazine, and that was all rock and metal as well. So, around a lot of musicians and music and, like I said, journalism, production, or promotion work. And when I transitioned out of that piece of it, then I actually started a podcast that was focused on females in the music industry. And that was kind of the first step to something a little bit lighter in that world, because it was just, focused on what females were doing. So it wasn't as much of that focused on stuff that was a little bit darker, but I didn't know that it was that dark until I was outside of it, because then there were other steps I took after that. So then I started looking into possibly creating some technology in that industry. And one of the things that I kept coming back to was wanting to understand how music could be healing, and really looking at what is in our music and what is the difference between stuff that's healthier and healing and what's not as healing for us. So it was like, step after step that kind of brought me to this next thing. And I'm even further in that because now I'm the founder of a starting company that is completely focused on that idea of,
Right.
sound that is healthier for us, including music.
So it starts kind of for you as, instead of it just being an industry where you just enjoy the art and expression and in that sense, into the actual effect that that sound is having on you, and what impact is this having on others. And now that's kind of where you're at now with your new brand that you're working on, and that is that sound and frequency, and how important that is on us, how that impacts us, mentally, and kind of all that in depth into that, and how we can use that as a healthier way to live.
The
Yeah.
holistic side.
Yeah. But music was always so important to me, and it was a piece of my healing, feeling good, whatever. But I really thought that even the metal rock stuff made me feel that way. But I'm gaining more awareness that there's a difference in how that stuff impacted me. And
Yeah.
it's just, my awareness of what that's like and who I was in those moments. And, my mental state was different. So there's an impact there.
Right.
And we think music is, everyone pretty much likes music. I mean, most people do. And they think that, it's really healthy for them, but there is a level that it can impact us. I mean, they've shown this. So there's, these experiments they've done with plants where they've exposed them to classical music, and they've seen them, grow in this really healthy way, and, they're growing expansively, and then they've exposed them to metal music, and they've watched them wilt and die. So that tells us something that, we're not largely aware
Right.
of, that stuff does impact us. And that's, what we were talking about with the documentary, was that it feels like that stuff is art, and we want to be able to express all sides of us, and there are darker sides of us. So I want to support all expression, but then what are we creating is, what
Right.
we
Right.
have been
Like
contemplating.
when do we draw the line, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then what are the real impacts of that? Like, we want to encourage, any kind of outlet that we all need, right? Like, and I think that's important to notice those things. And it's not like we're saying, artists and stuff that are in these fields are bad people. We're not saying that, if you're making metal music, that you're not a good person. It's not really like that. It's just, what are those influences? And then if we knew the impact of those, would we still want to do that? Would we still do that? And kind of bringing that back into that idea of, when we were learning from Out of Shadows, and the things that are behind there. What are the agendas that are behind, even these, the music, and in Hollywood, what is it we're really promoting? And the reason that I brought this up is because as you were processing this in yourself, and you were like, well, I know, but I feel like there's still a place for those, right? But then I ask, well, but if we weren't exposed to that to begin with, if the blood and gore wasn't sensationalized to begin with, and murder, and all of that that's in, and that's really in a lot of this, and the music that also has that frequency and that vibration, right? That we're being exposed to. If that wasn't there, would we still think the same way? Mm-hmm. Would we still use those outlets? Or would we find something more productive that actually does heal us in some way? Would we, could we provide support, a support system to work us through those tough times, compassionately with one another? And then would that still exist? Consciously, it's in our consciousness right now because we're exposed to it. Even from little kids. We see it in Disney movies, right? And I love Disney movies. This is no judgment. I'm not trying to say don't, but the realistic, the real side of that is, and if you go down that rabbit hole, you'll find some things out even about that, But if you just look at the movies that we grew up with, there's trauma in these movies. There's, there's death in these movies. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't find ways to deal with that, but are we doing this the right way? Is this healthy? And is that part of that agenda to keep us in that state? Sure, the music is kind of helping me because I feel this way, but it's also keeping me in that state of mind. It's keeping me feeling that way. Is it really helping me? Is it really moving me towards something more positive? And that's how we got to start looking at those things in our world. I grew up with the video games, and for a while I justified games like, Grand Theft Auto, right? And I thought, well, the right person, like I can differentiate reality from video game world. But is the purpose of that not just for people like me who could just play it as a game, or is it that it's, again, normalizing certain activities? It's creating an environment in my consciousness to accept these things as it's okay, right? We're creating our world, but we are literally the ones making that choice. We are accepting this. You don't realize that a lot of what is being spoon-fed to us, and we are being programmed in a way to think and act a certain way. And now when you get into where we are now in this more awakened consciousness, where I begin to think for myself, now I step out from those influences and I see that as programming. I see that as, no, there's something not right about that. Now I'm thinking again for myself, and I make decisions based on that. And then that comes to what you're saying, like now you start recognizing, wow, that music is holding a certain vibration, and that sent you down a path of deep contemplation of, okay, and connection to energy and frequency, and the energy we hold and the influence of that on us. So, and that's what I think is, very interesting, because how you're processing that information is how many of us are processing this. And that's why I wanted to get this out, is because I think people need to know it's okay that you feel this way, and it's actually important that you begin to recognize it that way. Begin to find that, that process, that rational, logical process that you're going through. You're going to start rationalizing things. And that's what they were kind of saying in that, Out of Shadows was talking about bringing that stuff up, being aware that you are processing these things and that some things are going to feel normal,
Yeah, because there's a line of there's art within that documentary that most of us would feel uncomfortable with and would not think is normal. Right. But then when you get into some of the just and we're talking about stuff with children, that's crossing a line for most people. But then when you get into stuff where it's more the gore and simulating death type things, right? That feels like, well, that's like art, right? Because we are programmed to feel that that's okay. So that feels questionable. But it's because of that long term. I mean, it's been programmed in us since the beginning.
And the terminology for that would be cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And that we see it on TV all the time, not knowing that it's actually really happening out there, to the point where it seems so absurd because we see it so much on our TV programs that we just accept it as fiction, that it's not real. And I believe that part of the programming that they had talked about in Out of the Shadows is that let's get people to accept it by seeing thousands of deaths on TV or through their video games, so it becomes normal. They normalize it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just so absurd that it could never happen. And then when it gets reported that it does happen, people won't even believe it.
Yes.
So there's another documentary that we had recently watched about Johnny Gosh on Amazon, and some of the stuff on there was just outrageous. People couldn't even believe it at that time that they were going through the investigation. So I'm not trying to get off track on documentaries, but this is just an example of how we see so much on television, on movies, on video games, where it doesn't seem real when we actually do identify a real incident that happens. It is so closely related to what we're watching. And I think that your point, you're coming to some point of like, hey, if we didn't have all this conditioning
Right.
on our programming, that we got so used to it, then we probably wouldn't accept it when we saw it. It probably wouldn't resonate with it. At some point, it's almost
Right.
like we're resonating with it, right? When we see it, so much of it programmed over and over and over in every show. And it's just recently, in the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, a lot of the programming has become so bloody and so gory that I personally can't really even watch it anymore. I'm like, where's the storyline? It's just so much going on, and so many people, all they do are just dying and slashing people, that it's become a reality. And I wonder, with that content, what is the purpose of influencing us so much with that content? Like, where is it going? What is the purpose?
Well, right, and kind of bringing it back to what you're saying, like, would we? It's to me, it's also what I'm saying is would we even still express ourselves that way? Would things like gothic expression, which again, I'm not judging anybody. I mean, I grew up in those eras too. I was grunge, and I went through the same kind of teenage years, and I got into some dark places. But would I still be expressing it that way? There's two things I think are really important. One, the influences of those things on us, right? The things that are actually out there giving us this kind of energy and influence in our consciousness. And two, the support of others, right? The love and support that we would receive from our community and our loved ones, and being accepting of certain emotions or struggles that one might have, right? So if we had that and we were building that around, would we still be doing that, right? Or would it be handled differently? Would we be in a group where we talk about this openly, free ourselves from that, find some sort of positive reinforcement or positive way to channel that energy, and then we would move on and heal and continue on to a really positive path? So, yeah, I think this is important to connect to our discernment on all of this too, right? I think discernment is another big word or big, change that we're all really starting to connect to. And meaning that as we bring in information, as things come in, we are discerning what is good for us and what is not good for us. And what has been suppressed, I think, with a lot of this technology or a lot of this information and movies and stuff that's been put out on us, is our own discernment. Because that's where we begin to make decisions for ourselves and say, this isn't right, versus, well, I don't know, it seems okay because it's mainstream. Everybody does it. What's wrong with that? There's 1,000 movies that are about that, so it just seems okay. It's been going on forever. And I think it's important to come to that centered conclusion of, this doesn't feel right. Connect inwardly a little bit. Something is wrong about this, And again, I come from a background, a lot of those things too. Like I went through a phase where I loved horror movies, and I've watched them on all different extremes. I mean, there's different types, suspenseful. There's the, crazy demonic ones and all that. I mean, I've been through all that. And I find that, again, it's been normalized, is that's okay. It's a movie, it's expression, it's whatever. Or maybe now I'm thinking that, wow, I'm really being influenced by these things. I really am being influenced by that. We can get in all kinds of theories on why all that happens the way it does, but I think that's an important thing to come back to, is discernment.
And, you kind of brought it up, some of the other things that were in Out of Shadows when it came to the children. So I will bring it up because it kind of goes along with what James is talking about. Is we were watching a show last night, and they had almost normalized pedophilia. And I stopped for a minute. I said, I'm not so comfortable with this. The point being is, it almost felt like in this film they're trying to normalize it. and I felt really uncomfortable with it. So I think that that's where we need to get back to, is discernment, and to really understand and call that out. Just call it out like it is. And I don't think that we're comfortable calling it out, and or else we just know about it, and sometimes we feel like, oh well, there's nothing I can do.
Right.
But there is something we can do.
So something I find interesting about this too is that we were aware of it in this film. It doesn't mean it hasn't been in a lot of these films. And that's the thing too, is I go back and watch movies with new eyes and I see things I didn't catch before. Yeah. And as you move through this, let's just think of this about being aware, conscious, right? More conscious of things. But as you move in this, if you go back and rewatch things, you're going to find different things that you didn't see before or catch. And what's interesting specifically about what you're talking about in that movie, it did, what was the purpose of that in the movie? It didn't really, like, the movie could have been totally fine without that specific storyline. It didn't have to be in there. It didn't serve any real purpose in that movie. So I don't understand. And again, I've always been somebody to watch things very objectively. I've grown up, I mean, I've watched tons of films. That was my babysitter for a long time. So I love my movies, but it's like now again watching with new eyes, and I'm seeing this and I'm like, why is that even in there? And that's important, that we begin to discern that that is not okay. Why is that in the movie? Why is that even in there for something that it doesn't necessarily need to be? And this is when you begin to say, okay, this is what they're doing. This is how they're putting this, out there, and they're trying to normalize these things. And again, if you watch this film, you'll see how this is really integrated into a lot of stuff. And it's important that we begin to out this information. Out it, man. I'm at a point now where I've been on this journey for a little while, and I'm ready to stand my ground when it comes to a lot of this. Now, I know everybody's going to move through different paces and speeds with this, and that's okay. It's okay. The purpose for this and this particular discussion is to say that this is how we're all processing this, and we're doing it differently, right? And, I think, Sommer, you're processing it really healthy. You aren't ready to just, like you say, like, I'm not ready to just take everything, for what it is. That's part of the process. That's part of what you have to do. We're not saying go watch this and say everything here is true. We're saying go watch this, think about it for a minute, and then maybe research some things. Look into it a little more. Do the same thing that they've been doing to you, which is, broaden that awareness and consciousness so that you can begin to accept or not accept and understand what is being put in front of you. And it's on many levels. And I love that you were able to bring it into the music industry too, because you're somebody who was in it, and I'm sure you loved all that. You loved that music, right? This was a part of who you were. You loved the people that were in the music. You were a journalist, so you're talking to them, you're getting to know people, and that's very exciting, right? And then you were bringing it into an element that was also really important, with women involved and females, and how that affects them, and how are they treated in that industry, which I think was really important. And I think that it's crucial to see that and then say, okay, well, what's the purpose of this industry really? Because it's really not just happening to the people in the industry, the females and whatnot. It's being sensationalized. It's in the music. It's in the music videos, right? And again, that could go down a whole nother rabbit hole. Yeah. We'll definitely have another topic for that.
Oh, I totally agree, and I think the word resonate, it's been coming to me a lot. I grew up too listening to grunge, alternative music. I mean, it was my out when I was a teenager. I don't know what it was, but it helped me release the angst, the teenage angst that I felt inside. So I was always, for a long time, I was not able to get into pop music. I just didn't resonate with that. I couldn't resonate with that happy feeling. And I think that it really, was a way for me to listen to some music that's a little bit more hardcore, because that's how I was feeling. So there are times where I just feel like, even now as a 40-year-old woman, I kick it back and I'll throw on something old, and I'm like, man, I still feel like this today. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow I feel another way, or I have to play on some other kind of track to even change my vibration and what I feel that day. So if I'm feeling down, sometimes I will pop on some classical music, and James will be like, why are you listening to classical music today, right? Well, it makes me feel better. Mm. And it's like, if I'm not feeling great, sometimes I pop it on to make me feel better. or I'll play something like I love electronic dance music. It's
Me
kind of
too.
happy and upbeat, so it kind of helps me feel better. So I think, that there is a place for it, but what's really behind the scenes in it?
Yeah.
That's the question. Like, what's subliminally installed in the music? So, because there
And
really
movies.
are,
Yeah.
there really are, and in movies and any
Yeah.
kind of content that we subscribe to, right? And what's normalized.
Yep.
Yeah, so music has saved me over and over, and I still listen to some of those things, but I'm also listening to other things that feel healthier. Um, and so I've evolved from that. When I look back, I was really unhappy actually when I was
Yeah.
listening primarily to those things. And that's what I try to do now is bring an awareness to that because it was my own awareness that started making that shift for me. And I think we're just so largely unaware. And if we really look at our society, so many people are so miserable. And so I want people to start to just understand like why. Because
Yeah.
I don't believe that we're meant to be that unhappy. I believe that we are taught to be that unhappy and we so
Yes.
often don't know why. And if we can start just peeling away those layers of what's impacting us, what are we being taught and sold and told we have to do, and there's so many layers of it. This is just like the tip of the iceberg
Oh
right here,
yeah.
what we're talking about. But that's, what I'm hoping to do for people. And what I'm doing is just helping them kind of look at just one aspect and see, like, how's that impacting me? How, because listening to that music, even though I still do at times, and I'm not telling anyone like you shouldn't at all or anything, but it wasn't making me any happier. Even though I was using it as a coping mechanism, it wasn't actually changing anything for
Right.
me. It was some kind of outlet, but it didn't actually move me forward. And so, the goal would be how do we help people and move them forward and start removing those things that are impacting them. Um,
Right. It's like you don't want to
yeah.
sustain the vibration. You're not trying to keep you in that vibration. Sure, it recognizes you there, but the idea is that you raise it, raise that energy and that vibration because that's healing and that's where we begin to find our happiness or whatever it is that, keeps us moving in that positive direction. So, I think that's wonderful. And, we'll definitely, when we get this going too as well, we're going to link, Summer's information in our channel as well. So make sure you visit her channel and we're going to have more talks about for sure, like specifics on what's going on that channel. And it dives into some really, really great information about frequency and in music and the healing effects and stuff of that. So stay tuned for sure for that kind of information. We're gonna have some great talks in there because that's also an area that I'm really passionate and really into as well. And I really thank Summer for coming in and sharing and being open with us about this information and giving us a little feedback on that journey. And Liz, also, thank you so much for joining us. And I appreciate all of the insight that we're getting today. So again, stay tuned, subscribe to the channel. This is all about the people of Earth, and you are one of the people of Earth. So stay tuned, and we'll see you soon. Bye, guys.